right, on to part 3. This is going to be the hog edition, and there are not too many things in the hog edition because there's not a whole lot you can do with a pig that is super sick or down. So we're going to start with, basically, I keep on hand 18 and 16 gauge needles and 6cc, 12cc, and 20cc syringes. That way I can give any kind of vaccine or vitamin or antibiotic. You know, if you use antibiotics, you can pretty much get hogs of any size, be it, you know, teeny tiny little piggies all the way up to big, you know, 800-pound sows. You can pretty much give them whatever you need that way. Some antibiotics, you have to give so much of it these days that you might end up needing, you know, something a little bigger, but that seems to work just fine. Oftentimes you have to split it into different spots anyway, so... Another thing that I would have on hand would be your scalpel scissors. You know, that's pretty much only if a pig has some major wound that you need to just trim some bits off and leave it be. You can't really suture pigs back together. So, you know, they tend to just, their skin is so attached to their underlying fat tissue that as they get older, their suture just doesn't work through that. So you pretty much just leave it alone and let it heal from the inside out. You want to keep, you know, obviously flies out of it. You don't want your you know, broken, torn up hogs getting fly blown. So, you know, a good fly spray or, you know, packing something into that to keep, you know, fly activity down would be a good thing as it's healing. Speaking of wounds, let's talk about wound cleansers. I pretty much like chlorhexidine. I use that a lot for if I'm going to go into a sow that's giving birth. I like to rinse my hand down with chlorhexidine, and then I add the powdered J-lube to it and smear it around, and then I'll go in. That way my hands should be generally mostly free of any cooties, and then the lube, of course, helps, you know, get my hand in there without causing the sow too much discomfort. Alcohol, maybe to, you know, squirt into an owie. Iodine, maybe, and blue coat. Those are the things. Oftentimes, I just leave owies be. Pigs seem to heal really well. They don't generally get too much abscesses or anything like that. They just, everything kind of just shoots up out of their skin and empties out the outside. So you don't have to worry too much about that. With pigs, probably the biggest thing having to do with pigs would be the confinement and restraint. Those are the hard things to do with hogs because you can't put a collar on them too easily and just tie them to a post like you can other things, or a halter. You can't put a halter really on a pig. And so to have a strong facility with concrete floor and, you know, steel walls or steel bars or something that you can kind of squeeze them into, push them into, squeeze them in, and keep them locked up where they can't turn around and they can't go over and they obviously can't go under, that's going to be your easiest way to actually mess with them. Also, you can use snares, which is kind of a loop of wire that goes into a tube that gets bigger and smaller. You hook that up over the nose behind these teeth here, and then tie it down and hook it to a fence, and they'll back up against it automatically, which keeps it tight. You can use rope. You also will do that, and then we'll run a rope down that and tie off the snout to a, you know, sideways if we're doing something, and just to kind of keep the whole head contained into a corner of a pen. That's really important. The snare kind of calms them down, though they scream really loud. They scream from their restraint. It does actually bring them down a little bit. It causes them to kind of like lock up and sort of just sit there. So snares, I think, super important. Another thing would be, you know, some ropes to off tie or whatever. Hog boards, super important. When you're moving pigs, if they can't see through it, they're more likely to go. So if you have hog boards on either side of them, they're more likely to go straight. If you're just trying to shoo them with your hands, they're going to go, I guarantee, the way you don't want them to go. Pigs are really good at deciding not to go through a gate because it's open now, even though they try to push the gate over all the time. Once the gate's open, they're like, nah, that's a trick. But if you put boards alongside of them and just keep them moving forward, and somebody in the back with another board just kind of bumping them in the rear, they'll usually pretty much go where you want them to go. And if they turn around and decide they're going to try to plow through you, oftentimes just shooting that board in front of their face and, you know, putting your foot behind it to hold it there, they'll hit it and like decide to turn back around and go the way you're asking them to go. So hog boards, having several people each, you know, manned with a hog board, can save so much time trying to move pigs if you don't have facilities that make it easier. And of course, you know, facilities that make it easier. That's probably the one thing I wish I had more of at my house, would be just better, sturdier facilities. And we built them knowing how hogs were, and, you know, when ours, it's worked out well. But, you know, hog panel makes a big difference over field fence. Field fence, they know they can just rip through it. I mean, they'll just go through it. They'll rip it up out of the ground, pull it off the T-post, and plow through it. Whereas a hog panel, they'll hit that, and it'll actually physically stop them, and they'll change their mind and decide to go down it instead of through it. So having good facilities is almost a must when dealing with having to move hogs around or restrain hogs. As far as injectables go, vitamin B, if you have a pig that's not wanting to eat, that's a good, injectable to use. Vitamin E works good for confinement hogs that are not getting out into the sunshine enough or not, getting out into the soil. Iron would be another one if you have a confinement operation where the pigs are on concrete and they can't go through soil and eat dirt. And then last would be like probably antibiotics. If you have a pig that's sick, knowing what's causing it to be sick and then treating it with appropriate antibiotics would be important. Vaccines, I don't use a whole lot of vaccines just because anymore with pigs, you almost have to have custom-made vaccines that will actually work for whatever it is your farm deals with, because there's so many different strains of hog disease that just the generic ones, I don't really have a whole lot of faith in them. So, when we have a problem on our farm, it's almost always some weird strain of something that I just kind of let it run through the herd, and the ones that survive are now good to go. So that's kind of not the best way to do it, but that's the way I found, just because I don't have enough hogs to really invest in a specialty made vaccine. That's pretty much as far as if you were just raising pigs from weaning to butcher, that's pretty much all I would need. Now, if you're going to breed pigs, you're going to have a breeding facility with, sows and boars and piglets and whatnot. You're going to need a whole lot more facility, first of all. And you're going to need neonatal supplies. And in my neonatal supplies, mostly what I use would be like a tube feeder for weak piglets that can't nurse, or runts that, if you want to raise them, a lot of people just let them, let nature take its course. But I like to raise them because I get paid by the each for pigs, not by the pound. So every pig that survives is more money in my pocket. So I will sometimes tube feed really weak pigs until I can get them onto a bowl. And once they have a strong, drive to eat, they go to a bowl real fast. And then you can basically just put it in a pan and they all come dive in and we're good to go. So tube feeder, if you want to do bottles, you can do bottles. I don't prefer bottles. I like the pan. Iron, if you have, like I said, pigs on concrete and they're not getting out into the soil, you want to give iron supplementation to your piglets for sure when they're born. Towels, paper towels or reusable towels or whatever to dry them off when they're born. I like skin staplers only for piglets. That's the only time skin staplers really work. If you get a piglet that gets stepped on and it folds back a flap of skin, you can stick that back on and staple it back together and the piglet will heal up just fine. Just make sure you remove those before you sell it as a butcher pig, because you don't want a bunch of itty bitty little staples in anything that's going to be eaten by humans, obviously. I do keep stitching needles and suture for piglets, because sometimes when we go to castrate, we'll have one that's cryptorchid, meaning only one testicle is descended. So I will actually surgically go in and find the other testicle, and then I will put a couple stitches in the abdominal wall so that the intestines don't bulge out there and create a hernia. Another thing I keep on hand would be 20 gauge needles for the little piggies and 3cc syringes for giving them whatever they might need, vaccines, whatnot. Of course, fluids for them would be good. Ringer's lactate, like I've mentioned in other ones, or saline works pretty well. You can do that sub-Q. If you, in a piglet, pinch the skin here on the back. Sows and boars, there's really no skin to pinch. It's really hard to do sub-Q fluids in a sow or a boar. So that's pretty much what I got for pigs. If you guys can think of anything else, add it to the comments below, and I'm sure that somebody else can learn from your comments as well. All right, talk to you next time. Bye.